All right, so Democrats in the House of Delegates have ousted their leader, Eileen Filler-Corn, and installed a new minority leader, Delegate Don Scott. Now, this is not the first time leadership coups have happened in the General Assembly, especially in minority caucuses, dating all the way back to 1985, when Minority Leader Vince Callahan was ousted by Andy Guest. Jeff Schapiro, what was going on in 1985 in the Republican caucus of the House?
Well, even as Republicans were making gains in the House of Delegates in the 80s, while the Democrats, by the way, were making gains at the statewide level, these were different kinds of Republicans. They tended to be more conservative, more combative. Though in the case of Andy Guest and Vince Callahan, the Republican he replaced, they were both pretty much centrists. However, Andy was of the view that the party could be more aggressive while it was out of power. Of course, it didn't last too long, and soon, Andy Guest would find himself on the receiving end. To kind of the point that we've discussed before, there's sort of a mafia-like quality to this, rival camps taking out rival leaders.
Note to people who lead leadership coups, the same weapons that you use can be turned against you, which is what happened in 1991 when Andy Guest was ousted by Vance Wilkins. Jeff Schapiro, what was going on in the House Republican Minority Caucus back in 1991?
Live by the sword, die by the sword. Andy Guest, far more moderate, far more centrist than Vance Wilkins, who really became sort of the embodiment of this continuing shift to the right within the Republican legislative arm. He had spent a lot of time, Vance Wilkins that is, identifying and recruiting candidates. And by the 90s, the Republicans were really building up a head of steam as a legislative party. And then, of course, it would be Vance Wilkins who would lead the Republican takeback of the House of Delegates. This was the first time in over a century that the Republicans had controlled the House of Delegates. He would become Speaker, and then largely by his own hand, have to relinquish the office, largely because of allegations of sexual misconduct.
So the leadership coups continued in the minority caucus, this time on the Democratic side of the aisle in 2007, when House Democrats were in the minority and the minority leader Frank Hall was ousted by Ward Armstrong. What was going on behind the scenes there?
What was really interesting about that coup is that it took place in the middle of the session and in plain view. Often these things would, unfold behind the scenes. There really was something, mafia-like about it. Frank Hall was not anticipating this coup. Frank Hall was stunned, and when he was actually stripped of the office, looked like a man who'd been shot. The beef with Frank Hall was that he was too old school, too accommodating, not insufficiently aggressive. And so Ward Armstrong, helped by a Northern Virginia Democrat by the name of Brian Moran, brought down Frank Hall. It's interesting that redistricting would do in Ward Armstrong several years later, when he was drawn out of his district by the Republicans, moved to an adjacent district to take on an incumbent Republican, and was defeated, and for the most part has never been heard from again.
Well, that's all the time that we've got for this week. My name is Michael Pope, and we've been joined by Jeff Schapiro of the Richmond Times-Dispatch. Talk to you next week.
See you soon.